Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Adamson. I'm the chairman of Forum Europe, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this latest session of the BioLife Talks entitled Forest Protection, Mitigating Climate Change, Fostering Biodiversity, and Delivering on the Green Deal. Before I introduce and welcome onto the screen the speakers for this session, let me very briefly set the scene for the discussion which will take place. As we all know, forests are critical to the functioning of our planet. They host 80% of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, regulate the water cycle, produce oxygen, and act as carbon sinks, sucking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Economically, hundreds of millions of people globally depend on forests for their livelihoods. Although the rate of forest loss and degradation has slowed globally since 2000, according to the European Commission, annual tropical forests are disappearing at a rate of around 13 million hectares, approximately the size of Greece, while Europe's forests are under increasing pressure despite steady gains during the last decade. Over the last 5 years, EU policymakers have begun to look more closely at the vital role forests play in fighting against climate change, and relevant for the current global context, the extent to which the protection of forests lessens the risk of zoonotic diseases and global pandemics. In 2019, the Commission adopted a communication that looked at the protection and restoration of the world's forests, and more recently, in July 2021, adopted its EU Forest Strategy for 2030, aimed at ensuring the future for Europe's forests, an essential tool in the EU's kit and anchored in the flagship European Green Deal. And in November last year, the Commission adopted its proposal for regulation on deforestation-free products, which is also presented to the European Parliament's Environment Committee. This third session of the BioLife Talks will take stock of the EU's work with regard to the protection of both EU and global forests, and we'll look at issues such as how can the increasing European and global demand for food, feed, energy, and timber be balanced against the need to protect forests? Can science, technology, and innovation provide some of the answers to tackling deforestation, both in Europe and around the world? What role should business play in influencing global supply chains and supporting sustainability? And ultimately, what is at stake for Europe as we consider the role of forests and their interactions with our complex economic and environmental necessities? To kick off the discussion, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Stefan Schrapp, who's Head of Public Affairs at the European Union at Bayer AG, who's going to give us some opening remarks. Welcome, Stefan, and over to you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to all of you listening for joining today, also from our side. Welcome to this year's first edition of the BioLife Talks. We launched this event series actually together with Forum Europe last year, and perhaps some of you have already joined one of the sessions. For others, it's probably the first time today. So thanks for joining to all of you. As a life science company, Bayer is globally active in the fields of healthcare and nutrition, and we're driven by the firm belief that science can actually help achieve a high quality of life on a healthy planet. With the BioLife Talks, we aim at fostering an open dialogue on the role of innovation and the contribution that innovation can make to overcoming the societal challenges that we're faced with. The topic we will be discussing today is very high on the political agenda, and Paul has already alluded to that, and actually rightly so, as it is closely linked with our common objective to halt climate change. The role of forests in mitigating climate change is critical. They play a key role in fostering biodiversity as well as enabling water and soil conservation. At the same time, between 1990 and 2020, the world has lost already 420 million hectares of forest. That's an area which is as large as the European Union. Fighting deforestation is therefore one of the key objectives of the EU Green Deal. Agriculture is an important factor when we're looking at the causes of deforestation. Jointly with the farming community, companies like Bayer hence can make an important contribution when addressing deforestation. Forest protection is an integral part of Bayer's sustainability commitments, and we are targeting integrated measures that see agriculture as part of the solution. partnerships here play really a key role in generating impact. And a prime example of that is, for example, the Leaf Coalition, in which, as a founding member, together with governments, NGOs, and other companies, Bayer was able to mobilize in 2021 more than $1 billion to protect rainforests in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America in order to stop deforestation. Our biggest contribution, though, lies in innovation. With new tools in digital farming and plant breeding, we can contribute to producing more with less. It is this combination of securing productivity whilst increasing the sustainability of agricultural production systems that will also help to prevent further land use changes, which are currently putting pressure on our forests. Bayer has committed to help 100 million smallholder farmers to increase their livelihoods in farming. And we believe that the increase in productivity will decrease the need to convert forest into agricultural land or to find additional income in forest exploitation. In close collaboration with other food chain partners, we believe we can work together to address the integrated challenges of preserving biodiversity, ensuring food security, and addressing climate change. Paul has mentioned it. At the end of last year, the European Commission tabled a proposal aimed at curbing deforestation and forest degradation through fostering deforestation-free imports of several important commodities. We welcome legislation that supports the EU on its pathway towards halting climate change and preserving biodiversity in line with our own sustainability commitments. Yet, an EU deforestation policy should strive for harmonizing standards and cooperation with other partners in the world. Strong regulatory guidelines must be supported by partnerships between producing countries and the EU and should consider farmers' realities, especially small farmers who produce more than 70% of the world's coffee and cocoa and around 40% of palm oil. They are at risk of being excluded from global trade and prosperity. Reducing deforestation should be an integral part of a strategy that increases sustainability practices in the agricultural sector. So deforestation legislation can only be one piece in that puzzle. With these initial remarks, I would like to turn it now back to Paul, who will introduce our excellent panel. And I would like to thank again the speakers and also all participants, and now look forward to an interesting debate. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for that opening. We'll introduce our panel for the discussion. First of all, I'd like to welcome Patrick Collard, who's Deputy Director General of the DG for Environment at the European Commission. Welcome, Patrick, and thank you for being with us. Rod Taylor, the Global Director of Forests at the World Resources Institute. Hi, Rod, and welcome to you. Rodrigo Lima, Managing Director of Aguero Economy. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but you know who you are, Rodrigo. Welcome to you. And then last but not least, a father and daughter team, real farmers who actually know what they're doing. They're working on the ground, like some of the policy people sometimes involved in these discussions. Yara and Dimi Digeo. So welcome to both of you all the way from Brazil, as is Rodrigo. Thank you all very much for being with us. I'm going to start with Patrick and invite you, Patrick, to give some introductory remarks and maybe tell us a bit about what the update is on what the European Commission and more broadly what the EU is doing in this important area. Over to you, Patrick.
Well, thanks very much, Paul. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks to Forum Europe and to Bayer for convening this important discussion at what is a critical time in my view. And I'd like just to set the scene, if I may, for our discussion, perhaps by talking a little bit about the European Green Deal in the context of the present crisis in the Ukraine, and then to go a little bit more deeply into the two parallel initiatives on forests specifically that have been mentioned, our forest strategy adopted last autumn, and after that the legislative proposal on deforestation and forest degradation. So, I mean, firstly, the European Green Deal and the context of the crisis, and I think that the lesson that we take away from the COVID pandemic is that the European Green Deal, our green growth strategy, offers really robust sort of policy support for the resilience and economic sustainability of our societies. And that in order to make progress, we need to remain faithful to the course that we have set towards a greener and more sustainable future. And I think that with the latest unprecedented developments and the return of war to Europe, these Green Deal objectives remain absolutely crucial. Crucial as we are seeking solutions to reduce our dependence, for example, on imported energy from Russia, with the deployment of renewable energy sources at a very large scale, but also the sustainability of our agricultural and forest protection models. Because I think that the debate that is emerging about there being somehow a tension or a conflict between food security and our longer-term environmental and biodiversity objectives is a false one. Because we vitally depend on having healthy and sustainable agricultural and forest systems in order to preserve the long-term sustainability of our economic model, not least if we are to reduce our dependency on imports of chemical fertilizers and other substances which are coming into our agricultural and forestry systems today. So that a little bit of the context. Now, I mean, on our two parallel initiatives, firstly, the European Union Forestry Strategy. This flows very directly from our biodiversity strategy for 2030, recognizing the crucial role that forests and forest areas play, not only as carbon sinks in order to contribute to our climate change and emission reduction targets, but also in terms of cooling down cities, providing protection from heavy flooding and reducing impacts of droughts. But also, as a major part of Europe's biodiversity, forest ecosystem services contribute in a major way to our health and well-being. And I think Stefan said a word about it through water regulation, obviously source of food, but also medicines, materials, elements in our disaster risk reduction and control strategies, as well as stabilizing soils and reducing erosion control, and contributing to the health of our air and water and addressing pollution, as well as the very important societal role that forests play for recreation, learning, and providing livelihoods for people who work there. So we are convinced that promoting biodiversity and climate-friendly forest management needs to come in hand in hand and synergy with our broader European Green Deal agenda. And so the basic aim that we're trying to achieve with our forest strategy is not to set impose a one-size-fits-all model on Europe's forests. We know that there are vast geographical, climatic, and other socioeconomic differences between the different forested areas in the European Union. But overall, what we need to do is to increase the quantity and quality of forests and strengthen their protection, their restoration and resilience. And this is very much linked also to the new proposals that we're working on as part of our biodiversity strategy for nature restoration. Because we believe that sustainable, multifunctional forests need to be at the core of how we address forests together in the European Union, and that only healthy and biodiverse forests can help to support the sustainable bioeconomy and also play the role that they can in climate and biodiversity protection policies. And that's why we're working in hand with member states to develop a shared vision around our strategy, which will then be followed, we hope, later with some legislative proposals. My third and final remarks are about the global dimension and the importance of working also with international partners to secure the sustainability, durability of forests across the globe. As we know, livelihoods of many millions of people worldwide depend directly on the existence of the forests, including, of course, many people in European Union countries. And so without the sort of vital functions that forests provide, we risk going into very negative cycles of degradation. And this is something which was highlighted most recently and at a very prominent way at the COP26 conference in Glasgow at the end of last year, where leaders came together around the global forest finance pledge, including our president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who announced a €1 billion pledge over the next 5 years, precisely to provide the sort of support that partner countries globally need to restore, protect, and manage in a sustainable way the forests of the world, and therefore help us to deliver on the Paris Agreement. And linked to that, and it was also something that the president spoke about, is this new proposal that we have adopted on forest degradation and deforestation, where for categories of key products, we are introducing a sort of due diligence process, which introduces responsibility for people and companies who are putting products onto EU markets to be sure that they are sourced from areas of the world, whether they are in third countries or countries in the European Union, in a non-discriminatory way, which do not contribute in any way to deforestation and forest degradation. And we're talking here about both legal or illegal deforestation or forest degradation. And the idea is to promote a collective, transparent, deforestation-free supply chains to secure the livelihoods of the many companies that are relying so heavily on these products. And we are very attentive, of course, to the implications of this important proposal for third countries, and working therefore with them, also with these financial resources that the president talked about, in order to accompany them through forest partnerships in making the necessary adjustments, with the overall aim of ensuring that the consumption by European citizens, European markets of the goods and services that come from global forests are not making more challenging the deforestation and forest degradation aims that we face. So, I mean, taken together, I hope that has sort of set the scene about the sort of central part that we see of the sustainable management of forests in the European Green Deal, and notwithstanding the challenges of the crisis in Ukraine, our determination to forge ahead with these important policies. So thanks a lot, Paul, and back to you.
Thank you. You managed to put your and I have a slight echo, that's why it's on the echo, John. Wonderful. I'm now going to turn to Rod Taylor. Rod, if you could unmute, or somebody will unmute you, and I now about to give you the floor. And it would be good if you spend also, let's say, a few words about what the World Resources Institute does so we can all be educated about that as well. Thank you very much. Over to you, Rod.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So the World Resources Institute is an NGO or think tank that operates at the intersection of sustainable development and the environment. And probably most relevant to this conversation, we host Global Forest Watch, which is kind of the Google Maps of forests, and you can observe deforestation happening in real time on the website. And I'm going to pick up a little bit from where Patrick was talking, particularly about and focus more on the deforestation supply chains regulation in Europe, which is really about Europe's footprint, mostly in the tropics outside of Europe. And I think it's a really interesting time because the private sector has been working on this issue for at least 20 years. The Forest Stewardship Council introduced a bar on converting natural forests to plantations way back in 1994. And ever since then, companies have been working towards deforestation-free supply chains. But the pace has been pretty slow because it's a pretty complex problem. But a lot of innovations in technology have really brought that agenda along in strides. And I think the combination of that innovation in the private sector with the prospect of regulation means we might actually get close to cracking the deforestation problem fairly soon. And I'll just give you an example of some of the innovations we've seen in the private sector. How you trace, commodities from source to end. Nearly every business now has scanners, online systems. that can read barcodes and whatever to track almost any commodity from source to finish. But as you go further and further upstream, it gets more and more difficult. You know, the smallholders, what happens between a smallholder and a processing mill, the challenges of tracking at that stage are much more difficult. But even there's been interesting innovations. For example, I know companies in Indonesia that track the cell phones of the drivers of palm oil trucks as they go around and pick up the palm oil, and they can work out which farm is providing which mill with palm oil that way. And then, of course, there's other things like, you know, big data. I don't know if you know of a platform called Trace that does uses artificial intelligence and big data to crunch the numbers on a number of databases to figure out what proportions of soy or palm oil from a particular place are going to a particular market. And then we have other things like blockchain and so on. But I think all of these things add up, and we also have a thing called Global Forest Watch Pro, which is designed to help companies assess deforestation risk in their supply chains. And we're working towards a point where they'll be able to press a button on that and get a really detailed report on the progress they're making towards a deforestation-free supply chain. So a lot going on, but if the legislation wants to leverage all this and not create chaos, it really needs to pay attention to what's going on in the private sector and what's feasible, and pick up and reinforce some of this best practice rather than kind of start a whole new challenge. And there's also a huge question of alignment. I'm part of a process called the Accountability Framework Initiative, which was a big attempt by all the NGOs to get on one page about what they expected of companies. And before we had that, you know, one company would get an A+ by one group and then a Z by the other group, because totally different criteria were being used to evaluate company performance. So the Accountability Framework has kind of come up with standard definitions and best practices, and it would be great if the EU could pick up on some of those rather than create another 5 years of arguments over definitions and so on. So I do see an opportunity, because despite all that private sector effort, we still have markets for commodities linked to deforestation, and the way to close that is to get regulation. And so then we'll have the best of both worlds, with private sector innovation and regulation really closing down the markets for deforestation linked commodities. And one last thing on the technology, it's a two-way street. I think some of the most interesting things about the new technologies are what companies can communicate to farmers that will help them grow better, produce better, understand the context, make reporting easier, all those kinds of things. Because as was said at the start, this agenda won't work if it leaves smallholders behind. So we really need to think about the kind of, it's a concept called produce and protect, which is basically supporting farmers to produce better, to give them incentives not to keep expanding the size of their farms, not to deforest. But the deal is that they get either better seeds, more technical support, and whatever they need to produce more on the current land base they have, rather than endlessly expand. So the technology is not only useful for those who want to kind of cut deforestation, it needs to be and should be useful for farmers as well. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rod. That's very interesting. I had lots of questions for you, but I'll wait till the end of the opening remarks before coming back to you. And I turn to Rodrigo. Over to you, Rodrigo. And again, like with Rod, if you could just say a few words about your organization before you start your opening remarks. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Rod, for your thoughts, and thanks for Bayer for the invitation to join this extremely relevant debate. Aguero Economy is a consultancy in Brazil. We work with different private sector agriculture chain here in Brazil, working to build upon what is sustainable development. We do several projects from restoration on the ground to renewable energy and WTO and climate change negotiations and other aspects that comprise agriculture in Brazil, connected to the world and the different agendas taking place from a multilateral perspective. And the subject today, I think it's one of the extremely relevant subjects. in Agroeconomy's view, and we've been working with this challenge for several years now. And I think what EU is doing with the Green Deal, bigger strategy, and the different regulatory pieces that Patrick mentioned are pieces of the puzzle, as has been said earlier. And my initial thought is that I think everyone agrees that reducing deforestation and getting to zero deforestation, it's a global challenge, and keeping forests and keeping native vegetation has several different benefits for society. I think no one can disagree with that view. The challenge is to put a value on the forest, on the native vegetation, and avoid deforestation no matter where is the vegetation located. So when it comes to international trade, and when it comes to the different chains, looking from producers to a trader of soybean, from a cattle rancher to the meat packer that we will export, we need to try to understand the challenge of having a land use deforestation information being passed along the chain up to the importer and then to the consumers, up to an importing company in Italy, for example, that will be liable within the EU regulations. So pass this information, and Rod mentioned several things that are being managed and built to try to give this positive information about land use deforestation. I think we need to have in mind when it comes to that challenge that there's no one size fits all technology solution. There's different approaches to try to get to this information that would be transparent, that will be credible, and then will be passed along the chain and make everyone comfortable that this product it's deforestation free. So I think the first point I would like to raise is that there's no one size fits all technology approach. And then considering what we are living in Brazil, and the reality about deforestation in the Amazon, for instance, I think it's very important to say that there's multiple drivers of deforestation, and agriculture is not the main driver of deforestation. There's a lot of land grabbing, a lot of illegalities, mining. There's agriculture as well, but it's not the driver of deforestation. And considering that we have around 90% at least of deforestation in the Amazon illegal, right? So how to manage production over those areas? Because if there's production taking place on illegal deforestation, this is simply not acceptable, not just in Europe, here in Brazil as well, and everywhere, because this is illegal. So this is one thing. Then there's, but if we agree that producers are producing over those areas, private areas, and most of deforestation, part of the deforestation is taking place over public land, and this is one thing illegal we need to manage. There's several different ways to try to tackle this. Then we get to the private areas. We have the implementation of the forest code. That is a forest regulation in Brazil since the 1934, then 1955, then several regulations and so on. Now we get to 2012. The final regulation is being implemented. There's gaps, yes, there is, but there's we have the Rural Environmental Registry as an instrument that gives a positive information about each property, each farm, in terms of already complying with the conservation requirements or not complying with the conservation. So it needs to engage into the compliance process to do restoration on farm. And without the card that is this registry, producers are not allowed to take credit today. So this is a piece of legal instruments that gives a positive information about if you're complying, if you're not complying already, or if you're totally not complying and a company cannot buy from you. So this instrument would be one of the possible instruments when we are looking for this goal to pass along the chain information about land use and deforestation. And I think this is very important because when we talk to producers, and we have Yara and Jimmy here, when the producer is conserving native vegetation on the farm, this is extremely relevant for carbon, for biodiversity, for environmental services, and in a broader view. And this is something that is peculiar from our agriculture, and we are happy with this because this is sustainable development in terms of producing and protecting approach. Yes, but there's the compliance, there's different challenges. Yes, we need to manage these and to tackle those solutions. So I like to bring the Forest Code as an instrument to try to pass away an information about land use and deforestation, because this is a legal instrument from one very important regulation we have. There's possible different approaches, like companies in the EU requesting geo-reference information about each producer, but then we need to understand how those information will be combined on a soybean vessel of 8,000 tons of soybean that will have probably, I don't know, how 1,000 producers to get to that vessel, and how those information in terms of a document that will be passed along the chain up to the importer will really be positive and pass a confident information about what we are trying to achieve here. So there's multiple approaches trying to capture how to pass this positive information on.
We can come to that in the discussion. So I ask you to wind up now in a few seconds, Rodrigo, so we have the whole discussion. Just finish off now, and then we'll come back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Just one point that Rod mentioned that I think it's extremely relevant from the perspective of how the EU can support and can achieve this goal. That I think this is not just a EU goal. It's not. I would rather say it's not just it's not possible to leave smallholders behind, because the more the requirements are pushed down from top down approach, the smallest that cannot follow and cannot engage into the adoption of some practice probably will be left behind. And what to do with the smallholders, I think this is something that we must have in mind here, aiming to build solutions from a producing chain perspective, and how a regulation from the EU can support this. I think it's something important to have in mind as well. Thanks, and I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. The last point has been mentioned by the previous speakers as well, so I'm sure we'll return to that in discussion. Now it gives me very great pleasure to welcome Yara and Dimi to the discussion. I'm not quite sure how you're going to allocate your speaking time, but anyway, I'll give you the floor, and then you use the time as you wish. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much, and hello to everybody. Thanks for the opportunity of being here. Very happy to talk about our reality as farmers. So this is Demi, my father. He's an agronomist and a farmer for more than 50 years. And being about 30 of these years in the northeastern part of Brazil, Maranhão state, where I'm also working with him now for the last 6 years. Working the family farm, so trying to learn as much as I can to run the business. And so we're here to talk a little bit about our reality. So Maranhão state is in northeast Brazil. We are within the Cerrado biome. We're not too far from the Amazon biome. We are a family farm. We are relatively small operation compared to some large operations that run in our region, but I think we are a pretty good picture of what professional farming with technology is about. So we're here to share a little bit of that. Our property, so you have an idea, we farm about 4,900 hectares of land. Yeah, 4,900, yes. About 1,900 hectares is crop production today. That corresponds about 38% of our land. We have another 16% of our land, that's 778 hectares of pasture land. And just making a remark that this pasture land is actually corrected soils, fertilized soils, so it's not just a exploratory type of pasture land. So this can also be converted to production land for crops. We have about 1.6% of our area, it's about 83 hectares, are dedicated to our infrastructure. So it's like the patio with the buildings, internal roads, fire lines around our property. And finally, most interesting part over here, 2,200 hectares corresponds to about 44% of our land is reserve area. So meaning that we have the native vegetation plus permanent preservation areas near water streams and rivers. That's 100% intact. So 44% of our land is preservation. So the legislation for the biome we are in obligates us to have 35% of native vegetation preserved in our land, and we are complying with 44%. So this is, and we're responsible for that area, making sure there's no fires coming in every year. So since my father started the farm, we hadn't had any big fires in the area.
Yeah, the last 27 years we have no fire more in the area, so we preserve it strictly.
Yeah, so we have a great diversity today in animals and vegetation and nature life. So that's what we do for over there.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Antti, Sir Dimi. We're going to start the discussion then across the panel. I think a lot of people may be watching are not experts in this area, certainly don't have the level of expertise and knowledge that all our speakers have, is to give a kind of flavor, because there's always, I think that when we talk about deforestation and forest degradation, it's always like a very negative image, and some of the comments some of you made en passant are quite critical. Is this a fight that the world is winning, or is it still a major issue? And at the end of the day, the world as a whole is still playing catch up. Maybe over to you, Patrick. Start with you. Are we winning this battle, or is it still too soon to tell?
I think winning the battle would be a bit of an exaggeration. And we're doing better these days than we've done in the past, but we still have a long way to go to reverse the damaging negative trends that we are facing. And that's why I think it is so important for the international community to come together behind the sort of commitments that we saw at Glasgow, behind the biodiversity the International Biodiversity Convention, whose sort of COP moment is coming up also in Kunming later this year, really to sort of come to what Rod was talking about, a sort of shared vision on what sustainable management of forests is looking like in the long term. But then also, what tools we have to support all the different actors in the supply chains, and taking account of their realities. And there, I think it's great to hear from Yara and Dimi the work that you've been doing over so many years, fully consistent with this vision of living your agricultural production in tune with nature. And we need to sort of learn the lessons that you've experienced and developed and share that globally. And we have organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, which helps us sort of frame common definitions. That's the starting point of the legislation that we've been working on, so that we're not trying to reinvent sort of definitions or concepts which are not sort of widely discussed and accepted internationally. But equally, I make no apology for the fact that the European Union does see itself as a sort of with a sense of responsibility as a leading actor in trying to sort of carry this global consensus in a positive direction, and I think that we have a sort of a window of opportunity at the moment, but it's a small and short window, and it's one that we really need to work on resolutely together. So not winning the battle yet, but things are moving in an encouraging direction.
Before I move on to what do you mean by the window of opportunity? Why is it? Why how long will it last?
Well, I mean, I think we talk about we have 10 years to address the sort of climate, sustainability, biodiversity challenges that the world is facing, and if we don't make the necessary investment now, the potential catastrophic consequences in a few years' time, it will become so much more difficult to deal with. So it's these few years that we have now really to raise our level of ambition and to work together. And what we're hoping for from in the biodiversity context, this meeting in Kunming later in the year, which has unfortunately been sort of delayed a bit because of the pandemic, we're looking to have a sort of Paris Agreement style moment for biodiversity, and where we come together to make collective commitments to restore 30% of the ecosystems in the world to a sustainable level by 2030. And that's 30% of both land ecosystems, so forests, agricultural land, but also the marine environment, which also plays a very important part in our climate objectives.
Okay, thank you. I should point out, by the way, before I move on to the next member of the panel, that to the audience, your comments and your questions are very much welcome. So please, if you have any questions or just comments, your insights, please put them in the chat, and we will address them as best we can as a panel. Moving to you, Rod, a similar question. You used yeah,
so I'm an optimist, but unfortunately we keep stats on deforestation, and they've been stubbornly persistent for the last 20 years. So it's amazing to me they just remain at these high levels despite all the good intentions and pledges. So if I'm honest, we're not winning the war, but I can see a few things that could really change that. One is the link between climate and forests. So, for example, all the companies that are pursuing net zero targets, and you mentioned that Bayer has joined Bayer has joined the LEAF coalition. So this intersection between climate and forests is becoming very interesting. And one of the main motives for the traders to pledge to go deforestation free at the COP was that their customers, big brands and retailers, are asking them what's the carbon footprint of all these commodities. And so there's this kind of knock-on effect down the chain, which is really kind of a new impetus for companies all along the chain to think about documenting their supply chains and so on. A second one, I think, is China. So the biggest market for most of the commodities in the world is China. It's either first or second on all the deforestation risk commodities. And we've been doing some work in China to kind of nudge China towards some form of regulation, more due diligence, and so on. And that's a very sensitive issue, and China is very much aware of the implications for smallholder farmers and producers. But at the same time, if China can move in a similar direction to the EU is moving, that's a really a big game changer. And so I think they're the two pieces. But I would emphasize this needs a kind of a rural transition country by country to maintain supply of commodities that will meet all these new requirements. And I agree 100% with Rodrigo that the burden can't be all on the producer. Some of the rewards, whether it's insurance provided against risks or whatever it is, has to come back up the chain to the supplier. And the degree to which the bureaucracy around this can be made simple by the farmer entering something relatively simple at the farm level and that going through the system without them having to do all the hard work, I think is the critical piece. And that ultimately goes to what's country by country a kind of a vision for the future where you can have the kind of farming Yara and Dimi talked about, and if farmers are protecting forests on their land, that they're rewarded for that, and they can easily report that. So I think that they're the kind of glimmers of hope that I can see. Over.
In terms of, Rod, another follow-up question briefly. You, in your opening remarks, you used the phrase of the best of both worlds we have, innovation and regulation. And I just, maybe you could amplify by that. You seem quite happy that this combination is working well together of innovation and regulation, or am I exaggerating what you're saying?
No, I think they can work together provided they're aligned. And how I see it is the voluntary is what kind of pushes the envelope on best practice and what's possible. And then the regulation makes sure those that do nothing don't get a free ride. Because if at the moment you can take no action at all on sustainability and find a market for your goods, and that undermines the effort by those who are trying to produce sustainably, and also often means you can undercut them on price. So you need to kind of cut out, as mentioned in Brazil, the illegal elements of the market, the really bad production, if you like. Regulation has to stop that. But then there needs to be kind of freedom to go above and beyond the bottom line set by regulation and let private mechanisms reward that.
Thank you, Rod. Turning to you, Rodrigo. I mean, it seems it may be too obvious to talk a lot about Brazil, but since three of our speakers are from Brazil, I want to briefly touch on that, because you did say in your opening remarks that you claim that 90% of the deforestation in the Amazon is illegal. I mean, for us who are not in Brazil, could you maybe explain to us, without, I'm not trying to obviously make any value judgments, why isn't there more of a public outcry locally against this illegal deforestation, or am I just being naive?
No, you're not being naive, Paul. It's a complex puzzle. The deforestation in the Amazon is, we can call it a complex puzzle, and I think it's quite important to try to set up this puzzle, trying to connect the pieces that must be connected, and that matches. Why I'm creating this figure to address your question, but it's because there's no one solution to tackle this deforestation. There's public non-designated land in the Amazon reaching up to 63 million hectares, which is too big. This is public area that is not conservation units that are the system of conservation units to protect areas. That is not indigenous land, that it's not military land. There's public land that is not managed through a specific form of management. So those areas are being grabbed for timber and wood, for land grabbers that want to sell the land in 5 years up front, and we'll put some animals there to say that this is my land, and I owe this land, and I don't have a title. I don't have a legal title, but I want to acquire this. So this is very complex, and which what we work for, and what we say is that there's we need to have transversal engagement from the government and from society and from stakeholders to be able to tackle this deforestation, and to give money to the forest, and to support smallholders, support poor people in the Amazon, to make them protect the forest and not deforestate and not do illegal actions. So I think this is extremely difficult to understand from what how much illegal deforestation happens. Yes, it happens, and one of the things we are working for and trying to create momentum for this. I don't remember if it's, I think it's Bayer that mentioned the LEAF strategy, the LEAF coalition. It's the reestablishment of the Amazon Fund in Brazil to try to tackle deforestation and avoid deforestation, and support smallholders and poor people in the Amazon to be guardians of the forest and not the contrary. So in line with this, I think we have a very huge challenge, and having the EU as a partner to find ways and implement projects aimed at avoiding deforestation, it's something extremely important, like other partnerships, including with the private sector, because if the private sector going from bottom to the top needs to have zero deforestation, because this is something quite important, it is important to build solutions along the chain up to the ground to keep forests, and also do restoration that Patrick mentioned. It's something big being discussed at the biodiversity negotiations that actually is taking place right now in Geneva.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rodrigo. We're starting to get questions in. I think most of them addressed to Yara and Dimi, by the way. But just to remind you all in the audience, don't leave it till the last 2 minutes before putting your questions through. Now is the time to put them forward. Now, before I take the questions from the audience, I want to ask Yara and Dimi in turn now. I mean, I'm not sure, forgive my ignorance, whether the 4,900 hectares of land make you qualify as a smallholder or not. But a number of speakers have said it's not possible to leave the smallholder behind, and it's important that policymakers and legislators and regulators and appreciate the particular circumstances in which people like you operate. Do you feel that in your position, as because you were actually spending every day on the ground, literally producing, that the political world, to give it a kind of generic phrase, understand the situation of people like yourselves, or do they still guilty of not sufficiently understanding and need to be more educated in what the stakes are? Yara and Dimi.
We have this this responsibility of taking care of our land. We do feel that our government does not give any support. They give us the responsibility, but no support to take care of it. We don't have any incentives as far as tax breaks or anything like that for taking care of this preservation area. Also, there's no incentives of okay, I pay you so much not to convert any more native land to to production land, something in that sense. We actually don't need to open more land. Brazil has plenty of potential the way it is with technology. But we feel it's a huge responsibility. We have to avoid the fire. We have to make sure there are no hunters coming in our land. We got to make sure there's no, I saw the question over here about people trying to take over our land, because those are large areas. If you have to be patrolling that all the time to see what's going on, and we actually do that. to make sure nothing happens. We farm in a plateau in southern Maranhão. Our neighbor farms and with us, it's about 150,000 hectares on top of that plateau. And we, as farmers, we all do this conservation because it's part, of the law. It's all legal, so everybody has the same percentage of 35% or more of preserved areas. And we all work together for any adverse condition of fires or everything. Everybody has fire trucks, so with water trucks. We hire airplanes to be on standby for any emergencies if there is something happening in the area, because those fires, when they catch on, they're just gigantic. So
the dry season, yes.
During the dry season, yeah. So just explaining why we have this problem with the fires, because we have 6 months of rain season and 6 months is dry season. So that's where the danger lives. So, and one fire in a farmer's land it's a big, it destroys everything. All this fertility, organic matter, all this build up, work that we do for our land, all goes out, and we feel that the problems for many years, losses in yield, plus the problem, burning down all the vegetation and the wild animals and all that. So it's a disaster. It really is. So, but since, sorry.
Did you want to say something?
No, since when the farmers take over the land, so all this is avoided for the most part. Sometimes it still happens, but I think for many years we don't have like huge problems, huge areas burned down.
But the whole responsibility is for the farmer. That is the difference. So when you have some problem in your farm, the government goes on you and charge you for that. And where the fire came from, where I don't know. The fire was there. So the responsibility is absolutely ours. So every farmer in Brazil, we were farming on land, but is the plateau land, the lato soil land, that kind of soil we farm. The most of farmland in Brazil is very poor in nutrients and chemical nutrients. So every hectare you have to put a lot of inputs to take something out. So that is not exploring the nature, what the nature fertility. We have no nature fertility in the most of the soils in the north of Brazil and in the northwest. You have very high fertility soils in the southern states, namely what was in foreign time was coffee and all sugarcane. That were the natural fertility. Now the new deal, the crop farming, soybeans, corn, and so they're all on farms with low nature of fertility. So we have to bring in everything. So that is costly, and so they have to follow up the height and as best the technology, the highest technology that's possible.
Yeah.
To bring in more on less. We have to make big profits and big deals using all the best technology available for that. We have a lot of other troubles to solve, but the production is the key. We need a high technology and bring in some profit with that.
Right. There's a question in the chat to Yara and Dimi, which I think you more or less answer, maybe, but I just want to make sure that the questioner gets a chance to hear from you. It's from Gerhard Adam. He says, hearing from Yara and Dimi how much effort they put into preserving nature on almost half of their land, from fire, land grabbers, and illegal logging, who is paying for all these costs when they don't earn any money from this? So you're saying basically you get no financial support. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, that is the correct. When you are out of we have a lot of laws to follow up, but you have sometimes no back feed over that. So we have to follow up and do the things in our legal form. In the legal form running in Brazil, that is the legal form. So there's no big choice, and that is all what the farmers are doing. The modern farming now and the commodity farming is doing that, exactly that. We have a lot of trouble, Rodrigo says, outside and in the Amazon. Everybody know that, and what is the solution? That is not our question. We are burdened with that issue. We are in that issue too, because you're upset. What is going on there? We will to quit import from Brazil and stuff. Yeah, we make a modern and very technified agriculture. We are winning carbon and not putting it in the atmosphere. So we are working with full season land cover, everything we're doing to try to bring up and lowering down the carbon. Use the IBC, Rodrigo know what it is. That is low carbon agriculture. We have integration with beef cattle and the crop grow. So we make short the beef cattle. We have a gain of 1 year or 2 years in the to bring in the cycle from the beef cattle. So then you have less carbon and methane in the atmosphere. So we are doing a lot of things. The modern agriculture is very high up. So that cannot be penalized by some things what is out of our control. Yeah. We are working hard about that to force the government and try to make the things legal again, and put everything in the legal form over the whole country. But that is very difficult and a hard job. So that is probably a job for the whole world to be. But penalizing a group of producers, that make no sense. That make it worse when you have no more way to. Everybody had to survive. And making their things. When you take after his soil, what to do then? Then you have a big change to illegal things, not to going ahead.
Just interrupt you, Dimi. There's a comment, actually, not a question, but a comment from a lady in the chat, which I'll read out. But maybe we should put you in touch with this lady after this webinar. It's from a lady called Maria Cecilia Guinness, International Program Manager for APRESID, which is the Argentine No-Till Farmers Association. So thank you, Yara and Dimi, for sharing your experience. I work for this organization as part of our international engagement. We have the goal of sharing the way farmers in our country produce sustainably, like you just shared, complying with legislation and implementing conservation agricultural practices that have multiple benefits. Maybe we should try and connect you afterwards. And there's also a question, most of the questions go to Yara and Dimi, from Christy Dixon, who's a senior manager for partnerships at Bayer. They very much appreciate what you've been saying. And quoting you that 44% of your land is for conservation. But Christy also asked, what are the farms around the neighboring farms doing? Are they very much doing what you're doing, or are they different?
Yeah. Exactly what the same thing.
Yeah, we can say we are a sample from what this farming what the farm is doing. Not only in other states, but in the other state too. That is the modern farming,
it's professional
the professional farming. You have the little farmers, the substantial farmers. They have not all the access for high tech sometimes because they have not the way, the financial condition for that. But our condition is better, so we may do that. We are trying to put everything, what you say, producing more and with less. Then bring with high tech, you can grow. That is every time, but my whole life we try to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Making more with less. Making more with less.
Really, I hear what you say to me. We're coming actually quite close to the end of our time, so I want to make sure everybody on the call who stays with us has a chance to give some concluding remarks. I have a question back to you, Patrick. But obviously, you talked a lot about the European Green Deal, which is obviously a flagship of the current European Commission, and obviously the focus of that is obviously local, if you like, the EU. But you did also talk about, and your third point about the global dimension. I think maybe this conversation is the most interesting because based on the conversation and interventions of Yarin Dini, but also Rodrigo, is obviously an international issue. So how do you see how you, the European Commission and the EU, can broaden and have this kind of leadership role that you like to have when it comes to these matters at the global level? What are the structures, what are the steps, what are the strategy the European may or may not have to try and grow this global awareness and need for cooperation at the global level?
No, well, thanks. And I mean, it's really great to have Yarin Dimi with us. And we rarely manage to talk directly to farmers in the European Union. So to have this moment to really engage with you and hear the sort of passion that you bring to sort of contributing to this agenda is really encouraging and refreshing. And I'm hoping, by the way, I've been hoping for 2 years to visit Brazil, and this summer with the travel restrictions, I'm really looking forward to it. So maybe we can meet up. But on the global dimension, I mean, a few things. I mean, firstly, we need to continue to engage and exercise our sort of collective political leadership in fora like the Global Convention on Biodiversity, in the COP. I mean, our commissioner was last week in Nairobi for the United Nations Environment Assembly, where we came to a really important agreement to start working, or actually agreement on international what is a nature-based solution. And that may sound like a simple thing to agree on, but actually, if we're to achieve the sort of comparability of what's happening in different parts of the world, having common internationally recognized definitions for things like nature-based solutions is very important. Something else that's been mentioned by many of the speakers is the opportunities presented by new technology. And the European Union also has an extremely extensive research and innovation framework program, and I was privileged to work in that department until very recently, where we are working with researchers, with the private sector, on how to develop new technologies which will improve our agricultural practices, limiting the use of pesticides, these sort of things, develop new strategies to help us, reconcile our biodiversity and our, the sort of production needs of the land. But another thing that was mentioned, I think, maybe by Rod before he left us, was the importance of monitoring and data. And we have a very extensive Earth observation capacity. And one of the things, with our satellites, to see how forested areas, agriculture is developing. And one of the things that we're trying to do in our strategy is to develop a new observatory to gather and report on data about the state of global forests, obviously within Europe, but also to contribute, therefore, to the international level. So it's a combination of leadership in policy terms, in adopting sustainable and responsible policies for the European Union and the way that we consume the global resources, and then also contributing with the research and innovation policies that we can to develop new best practices, which we hope will contribute internationally. A long answer.
Thank you, Patrick. And then to you, Rodrigo, you said also that reducing deforestation is a global challenge. So what is your kind of recipe for the global response to that? And do you recognize the kind of, we hate to say leadership role for the EU because it sounds rather self-serving and arrogant, but there's kind of, the role that the EU can often play. Do you recognize that from your vantage point in this context?
Yes, I recognize, and I tend to believe that the EU has a greater role to play when it comes to how to support those countries to tackle deforestation, and not just say, I don't buy from you anymore, bye-bye, because I think that doing this, the EU will not be really taking the lead of this goal. And adding to what we are discussing right now about innovation, and Patrick mentioned the importance of this. It's really amazing to see that at the Paris Agreement, there are 142 NDCs, nationally determined contributions, that consider agriculture as a sector that the parties want and are willing to adopt measures to reduce emissions and to adapt agriculture towards the impacts of climate change. So 142 NDCs considering agriculture. We are talking about innovation. Without doing innovation, and what does it mean innovation? We rely on climatic factors, soil, what kind of agriculture is being implemented. If parties at the Paris Agreement fail to support those practices on agriculture, collectively we will fail to tackle climate change and to consider the role of agriculture to adapt, to reduce emission when it is feasible to do that, as part of the solution to tackle climate change. Agriculture and land use needs to contribute for sure, not to mention energy and the other sectors. But I tend to read that the EU with the Green Deal and the regulations has a very prominent role to play to support countries in this regard, and as well the private sector when it comes to conserve native vegetation, to restore native vegetation, and bring this value along the chain up to consumers in third countries. There are some companies doing restoration, for instance, and supporting producers with the implementation of the forest code. But this is just a few cases, and we need this engagement along the chain to really pass this value of the forest, the non-converted forest, along the chain up to consumers, and bring this as a common benefit for the whole society.
Okay, thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Rodrigo. I want to give the very, very last word to Yarandimi, but before I do that, Yarandimi, there's a quick question from Stefan, who spoke to us earlier from Bayer, addressed to Patrick. If you could maybe pat this away, Patrick. The question is, how do you see the role of existing certification schemes in the new EU regulatory frame?
Yeah, well, I'll be brief because we are running out of time. But I mean, of course, we welcome all the efforts that countries are making to develop and strengthen their national certification and monitoring systems, because that will help their producers to align on the EU standards. But we are not going to sort of be taking sort of wholesale the national systems as sufficient proof, because we need to have a harmonized system overall. So not a substitute for meeting the EU standards, but certainly an important step in the right direction.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, I want to give the last word to Yara and or Dimi. Yara and Dimi, I can imagine that you're too busy each day, every waking hour, making your business a viable concern rather than worrying about regulation and legislation and policy, all that kind of stuff. But if you have basically a minute now, and the audience is quite wide out there, and certainly we have Patrick from the European Commission listening to every word you say. Do you have any final thoughts or ideas or advice you would give to policymakers and regulators about how to make your life easier and more viable?
Yeah, I think we as farmers, we want to be recognized by the work we do, not only on the land we produce, but also the land that we preserve. Mm. A lot of times we are seeing with the bad guys, the farmers get a bad reputation of being the ones destroying the land or setting fire on everything, and things like that we see on the media a lot. I think the certifications are, for us, it's a good thing. I think it just demonstrates and puts a seal on what we're doing. We're taking care of our land, we're taking care of our people, also the social aspect of the farming, the people that work for us, development in remote areas, because 30 years ago when my father got in Maranhão, there was absolutely nothing there. So it takes the farmer with courage to go there and develop those areas. So
social area,
yes, and so a lot has changed in the last years. I think that's what we need. I think it's validation and not being considered the bad people in this story of deforestation and illegal acts in Brazil and in other parts of the world.
Okay. I think so. The countries, all the countries, to try to find the way of life, for get a solution. We are producers because, but Europe, they are consumers from a lot of our stuff. So, but they are involved indirectly with the whole environmental business. So when I think they have to chair knowledge about how to handle the things that are not right now, not to solve this problem. The food problem, that is okay, that is running, but we have to solve other problems. Environmental rules and so on. What is going wrong in the world and in our region too. Brazil has the biggest forest cover from the world today, so that's probably on the focus. And to try to preserve that, what Rodrigo said, is that is very difficult, hard to do that. And they need the support from other countries too. There's no solve for only for that. For our country, there's no way to solve that. That's my opinion.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. It always pains me to cut people off when we're having such a fascinating discussion, but we have run out of time. I'd like to thank people in the audience who are watching and people who ask questions. I'd like to thank Bayer for sponsoring this series of Bayer talks. But last but certainly by no means least, our speakers, Stefan, who spoke to us at the very beginning, Patrick Child, Rod Taylor, Rodrigo Lima, Yara de Geos, and Dimi de Geos. Thank you all very much indeed. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I hope we can find some way to carry on the conversation on a different occasion. Thank you all very much indeed, and have a nice rest of the day. Bye-bye, everybody.